Hello and welcome to the King Pie podcast. So the Under 19 T20 World Cup, it is done for women, and next up is the Women's T20 World Cup, the senior one, of course. And alongside that, there's also the Women's Premier League. It's auction coming up on the 13th of February, and there's a lot more going on in the women's cricket. So we'll go through all of it. Let's start with the under 19 T20 World Cup. First of all, Stuff, how are you? And did you follow that tournament?
I'm doing good, yeah, thanks. Yeah, the U-19 World Cup, well, I probably didn't follow it as closely as I followed the men's one last year. Like, it was still something I kept up with, and it was, it was a lot of fun at various moments. It was a little disappointing how one-sided the final ended up being, and I still think the format is complete nonsense. But yeah, overall, it's a great tournament. It was great to see, all these new talents coming up. Just a great showcase for the women's game.
Of course, with this tournament, actually, there were two issues. You have already pointed out one of them, the format, and the other issue that came up, when the tournament, the teams were actually announced for the tournament was teams, especially India, having more internationally experienced players in the team, Shafali Verma and Richa Ghosh. So, what was your general point of view around that thing?
So I think that there's no way to make a rule against it, and there shouldn't be a rule against playing players who have international experience because you're just limiting a lot of teams. Like a lot of the UE players have played for the senior team quite a bit, and if you don't allow them to play in the U19 World Cup, you really take away the amount of players they're allowed to use. And even if you change the rules to only associates can use players with senior experience, that's still very um, it still limits a lot of teams. Even a lot of the full members have very limited talent pools. They can't really afford to not use their players that they debut early in the senior format. I think it's just up to the teams themselves to decide if it's worth it or not, because for a player like Shafali Verma, is it worth it for her to be playing a youth tournament for her development? I'd say maybe not, because she's already shown she can do it at the senior level. So it might just be better for her to, take some time to rest, play with the senior team, with the warm ups the Indian senior team is playing right now, and someone else can take her place in this. At the end of the day, this is a developmental tournament. The U19 World Cup is a developmental tournament, and every board should be looking at it from that perspective. Like in the men's game, Afghanistan elected not to play Rashid Khan when they had the chance to in a U19 World Cup because he was already doing amazingly for the senior team. There was just no point in him playing a U19 World Cup. Pakistan chose not to let Naseem Shah play a U19 World Cup because there was just no point. Now, at the end of the day, I think it was the wrong move for Shafali Verma and the like to play this tournament, but also it's also just the Indian selectors' decision. There's nothing the rest of us can do about it. If they felt it was worth it, okay. But I don't think it was.
And there's an interesting situation that kind of stems out of this whole thing, because England and Australia, those are the teams that already not only have a very budding kind of domestic structure, but they already have a T20 tournament where their young players can play with the international players. I mean, obviously Ella Hayward and Reese McKenna have already played alongside a lot of international players in the women's Big Bash, and so has Sophia Smale. So I know it is obviously not something like playing 70 international games, but I feel like there's always going to be some kind of gap between the top teams and the lower teams, no matter whether it is allowed for the international players to play in the tournament. I mean, how do you see it from with respect to the tournaments like the 100 or Big Bash, because they are also providing players with exposure to some international players. So do you think it is also providing almost the same kind of benefit as it comes with the having some international exposure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's also why you can't really legislate against certain players. There's no way you could make a perfect formula to allow for every team to play on the same level playing field, because that's just not the way cricket is. There's huge imbalances in the sport and the development side of the sport. And yeah, there's just nothing you can do to prevent some teams from having players with so much more experience than others. So again, yeah, I think there shouldn't be a rule against players, becoming ineligible by playing too much somewhere else. At the end of the day, it should just be down to the individual boards to decide if a youth player with a lot of experience, be it in a T20 league or with the senior team, if it's worth it for them to play a youth tournament or not. Yeah, so there's basically nothing the ICC can do to ensure that every team is playing on a level playing field, because that's just not the reality of the game. Every country has different levels of development for their players, for their youth players. Like England will have the 100, Australia has the WPL. A lot of Asian countries tend to debut their players much earlier, and so their best youth players have a lot of international caps before they turn 20. So, unless the ICC goes in and analyzes every squad and says, okay, this player passes some arbitrary criteria, so they're no longer allowed to play, which is just a lot of effort and I don't think it would be very fair. Unless they do that, you're just going to have to deal with certain teams and certain players having way more experience than others. And also, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing to have some players being better than others. Because even at senior tournaments, some players are better than others. Some players have way more experience than others. That doesn't break the competition. But yeah, like at youth tournaments, at the end of the day, all you can really do is just leave it up to the individual teams, the individual selectors, and it's up to their discretion if they think these players who are much more experienced than the competition is likely to be, if it's worth it for them to play in these tournaments or not.
Beginning saw some of the better pitches where the games were much more high scoring, and by the end, especially the semi-finals and the final, were heavily low scoring. So, I mean, what is the point here? Because you know, are we actually, because as you said, it is a developmental tournament. So, is there any point if we are just going to have people play like these 80 or 90 run games in a T20 tournament? Is it really attributing to any development?
I mean, yeah, it does help with some development, but yeah, I do agree that the pitches probably weren't great. And the problem was they only played this entire tournament across two grounds, and there was a lot of games to play between those two grounds. So by the end of it, the pitches did get very tired. And yeah, like it's something you could fix by playing at more grounds. Something you could fix by having. I don't want to throw the groundsman under the bus, but there probably were things they could do to make the pitches last a little longer. But yeah, like as a developmental tournament, the tracks weren't great for players to develop, and I think like also just in general, both the format and also the format of the tournament and the format of the games themselves being T20, I think it sort of undercuts the developmental purpose of the tournament a little. I think the men's U-19 World Cup works so well because it is a 50 over tournament, so you get more time for players to play. A lot of them are playing a format they wouldn't have been able to play before, and the format itself, the tournament format itself, allows for every team to have a guaranteed. I think it's 7 matches, whereas in this one, some teams are playing 4 or 5 matches. Some teams are playing 7, 8, 9, even. Like it's just this tournament is just very unbalanced from that developmental standpoint. And again, it being T20, which is a format most of these players have already played a ton on pitches which weren't that great, which were very tired, which were assisting one discipline too much. It is the first tournament, so I can't be too harsh on it. But they have the perfect blueprint in the men's U-19 World Cup, which I think is basically a perfect tournament for everything they want to do. They could have just copied that exactly, and this tournament would have been perfectly fine. but they didn't for whatever reason, and I think it sort of undercuts the developmental purpose of the tournament a lot.
Talking about the format, what exactly is the format here? I mean, I'm actually asking because I did not understand what was the format here. Can you please enlighten me and anyone who's listening?
Yeah, so it started off as four groups of four, but unlike so the men's U-19 World Cup is the format is also very good, also very simple, right? Because you have four groups of four, top two in each group go into the top bracket knockout, the top knockout bracket, where it's quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, and you also get placement matches in the middle. And the bottom two teams in each group go to the so-called plate bracket, where it's again quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, but these are placement matches for 9 to 16. This one is a little different because it's four groups of four, but instead just the top three teams go into two groups of six for a second group stage. One of cricket's favorite pastimes is having multiple group stages. So of course you have to bring it back for this. So you have two groups of six, two super groups of six for these second group stages, and in these ones you play every team you haven't played already for an additional four matches, I believe. Yeah, an additional four games, and points carry forward and all that. And at the end, you play. The top two in each super group go into the semifinals. Everyone else, I think they actually just go home. I don't think there is placement matches for the super group teams. The bottom team in each initial group has their own lower bracket for placement 13 to 16. But yeah, like that's another thing with this one, is that the format is just it's overly complicated for basically no benefit. Because what does it even do? It makes sure that some teams are playing 5 games, some teams are playing 7, some teams are playing 9, and yeah, it just makes no sense from a developmental standpoint, because you want the whole point of the men's U-19 World Cup to have the format it does is to make sure every team is there for roughly the same time. To make sure Fiji isn't flying out for their first World Cup ever just to play 3 games in a week and go home. They're there to play 6 games no matter what over the course of a month, just like everyone else there. And that's why it's so good for a developmental standpoint, because you're playing teams, and at the end of it, if you're getting blown out at the start, by the end of it, you will be playing a team that's one or two teams that are on the same level as you, because that's how the placement games end up working. And again, that's why the men's U-19 World Cup is so well, because it works so well, because it's so simple, but it's also so good for what it wants to do. And this one just completely fails at that. It just makes no sense why the format is the way it is. There's just no benefit to it at all. And yeah, it's overly complicated. It makes everything so much more uneven. And yeah, like it just doesn't help to like it's not that great for a developmental standpoint either. Like I think the only thing it does is maybe make the tournament cheaper by sending teams home quicker, which is that's not you don't want that for a developmental tournament. You want the teams to be able to play games and to leave the tournament with a good experience instead of you know sticking around for a week and then being thrown home because they got placed in a bad group. It is the first U-19 World Cup, so maybe we should be more the first women's U-19 World Cup. Maybe we should be more forgiving, but they have the perfect blueprint in the men's U-19 World Cup that's been ironed out and made so perfect over the course of 20 years. They could have just copied that and everything would have been fine. They didn't for whatever reason. And it just makes no sense to me.
And now moving on to the actual tournament, which, as you said, four groups of four team each, and I think initially the tournament looked really good. The Bangladesh Australia game, it was a really exciting one. There were some other games where there were some uh, unexpected results, and one of those teams was Rwanda, and they actually did really well. Uh, Managed to win against Zimbabwe. So I think you have actually followed their path to this tournament, if I remember correctly. And how do you rate the whole rise of Rwanda, especially the Rwanda women's team? Because I think They have done really well to come up to here and even be a great competition in general.
Yeah, Rwanda's been doing very well lately. And yeah, like there are a lot of African teams which are really on the up, and it helps that the African Confederation, I think it's just ICC Africa, but it helps that ICC Africa has been scheduling all these qualifiers and trying to get as many teams into these qualifiers as possible. Even the members themselves have been trying to schedule their own annual tri series, quad series, trying to set up as many tournaments as they can to get each other playing more, and for both the men's and women's teams too. So yeah, for Rwanda made it here. They weren't the best. They weren't the runaway best team at the tournament. They were run quite close in their qualifier, but they made it here, and they beat Zimbabwe and quite comprehensively too. And yeah, like Zimbabwe is another story from this tournament because they were very very poor. They lose to Indonesia later as well, and I if Zimbabwe had to go through the African qualifier, I don't think they would have finished in the top two, which is probably saying a lot about their developmental systems. But I wouldn't be too concerned about Zimbabwe, I guess, because they have the funding. I think they do just need to make some quick changes, and then they should be fine going forward. But yeah, like it is very yeah, like on Rwanda, wonderful story to make it to this tournament to get their first win, get a major win over a full member team, and yeah, even though they don't win, they don't win another game after that. Um, Actually, no, they do. They beat the West Indies
Actually,
as
they
well.
did
Yeah,
beat
yeah. So they
West
win.
Indies as well.
Yeah, so they win two games here each against two full members. It's quite, you know, it's really great for them, and I'm sure we'll see more of Rwanda going forward because they do feel like a team that's really trying to stick around and really you know keep up with this cricket business. And yeah, like they're a country without many great sports teams, so I feel like if cricket can take off there, like they'll really get into it.
Interesting because one of the teams that Rwanda played was New Zealand. Now New Zealand actually had more or less uh, what they usually have in the senior men's or women's tournament here, because they actually dominated the group stage, their whatever you want to call the second group stage, the Super Six group stage group, and basically they won five of their six games rather easily. And then something happened to them in the semi-final, which is usually the Indian story. So, and remember, even they are coming off of some of the players who have some experience outside, right? I think there's Georgia Plimer who has played some games, if I remember correctly. I mean, there's players who have done a game here or there. But how do you see this team? Because they actually started off really well and then kind of fizzled out in the semi-final.
I think it is quite positive for New Zealand that they did so well at this tournament. Because New Zealand tend not to do very well at youth tournaments, but the fact that they did really well here shows that their women's system is still producing a lot of very good, very talented young players to lift them forward. So while the senior team, there's a lot of worry with the senior team right now that are going to stall quite a bit and sort of fade away. The fact that their youth team did so well with this event, it didn't end well for them in the semifinals, but before then they'd won every game until then. So yeah, like that's just really positive sign. And I don't think it's the I don't think the semifinal defeat will define this generation of New Zealand players. I think they're here to stay, and they should, if they make the transition to the senior team well, and some of them already have before playing this tournament. And I think New Zealand will continue to be a very strong force in women's cricket going forward.
Uh, Talking about the other semi-final, the England versus Australia. I think obviously every tournament has that one game that basically the game of the tournament kind of thing, and in my opinion, that was this game, the semi-final between England and Australia. And as we talked earlier, the pitches had kind of tired out at the back end of the tournament. But I feel like this was that one game that was actually a silver lining, despite not the best of pitches.
Yeah, it was a real back and forth game, and England came back really well to win that. Yeah, like it just sort of shows that like no matter what you get, what sort of tracks you get, what sort of players you are playing, what sort of format it is, what sort of competition it is. Cricket can always just produce these amazing all-time great encounters. So no matter how far the deck is stacked against it, cricket is always able to produce wonderful things, and we saw that in the semifinals. So a fantastic game.
There's one more thing that I usually, I mean, we are obviously from the part of the world where there's not a lot of ICC trophies have been coming in lately. So I'll probably bring it up in a general sense rather than actually regards to the tournament. And so here's my question to you, simply regarding the team or simply regarding the players playing in an ICC tournament, not simply this tournament, but always. So a lot of people simply put how certain player is not a big match player, or certain player should be selected because he or she is a big match player. Ben Stokes or anyone else. When we talk about Shafali Verma, right? Someone like Shafali Verma, who has previously kind of not have had a good time in some of the knockout games, and I think she had a decent time here, even though her batting did not work completely, but she did decently. Then, as I said, I was talking about Ben Stokes, right? Before being the guy who won the 2019 World Cup for England and the 2022 T20 World Cup, he also failed in, in the 2017 Champions Trophy final, beg your pardon, semi final, and the 2016 World Cup T20 World Cup final. So here's my point. When the teams are announced or teams are selected for these kind of tournament, is it actually a point of substance to think of what player can absorb the what player has the history to absorb the pressure, or is it actually the form that we should look at? Because we have actually the evidence for both. I mean, there's times where experienced players have failed in on big stage, and there's times when inexperienced players have done really good in those situations. Example, Fakhr Zaman. So with the inclination to simply that, how do you how do you kind of go with the business in general? Do you select someone who has the experience? As we talked about Shafali Verma, she already had the experience, and felt like India wanted to exploit that, but it did not work. On the other hand, England had a few players that did not have a lot of experience, like Hannah Baker, but she did well in the semi final. So where do you want to lean with that thing?
There's just so much that goes into selection, so much that you can't quantify, so much that you can't really explain well. Just anything you do you can look back on it and say, okay, I could have done this differently, could have done that differently, they could have done this differently. And everyone becomes a hindsight expert. I think you should always pick the team in the best team for the game, and that means you look at conditions, you look at recent form, you look at overall stature, and at the end of this, just the gut instinct on if two players are very similar, you just got to go with the selectors. You just got to go with whoever fits the bill slightly better. And at the end of the day, you can justify it any way you like. Other people can justify the opposite decision any way they like. At the end of the day, like you can't change a thing. So you just gotta stick with whatever decision you make. I would personally favor recent form more. Like you talked about Ben Stokes. If Stokes does not play an ODI and before the 2023 World Cup, I would not pick him for the 2023 World Cup because he just doesn't play one day cricket. But other people might feel differently because he's a big game player. You can justify anything however you'd like it. And yeah, at the end of the day, I think people make too big of a deal out of all these tiny little factors that probably didn't really change anything. But that's part of, I guess, what makes cricket so great to talk about, is that you can talk about anything and you can argue anything however you'd like it, and just you're not necessarily wrong for thinking the way you do.
It is interesting because, as I said, actually, there's a lot of players in English and Australian side that have a lot of the 100 and WBBL experience. And then there's someone like Soumya Tiwari who has mostly played these under 19 games against maybe New Zealand. There was a series down the road where India played, I think, 5 games against them in India itself. But she did not have a lot of exposure to international cricket outside of that. But actually, she was the best batter in the final itself. So that basically proves your point, because you know whoever is in the form that day would do the best, and seems like that was the case here as well. So moving on, the T20 World Cup is coming up. It is from 10th of February, and meanwhile, there's something else that has been in kind of in the news, and I think you are also aware about it, the Women's Premier League. So, first of all, I want to know your initial thoughts on whatever has been revealed. Obviously the teams, the money, if you want to get into it, but that is not the point here, and the fact that it would be conducted mostly in a in two stadiums basically. So, how has your initial impression of the tournament or the arrangements been?
Look, it's good that it's happening. It's good that they got a lot of financial interest in it from the franchises, from the broadcast deals. I think it's something I complain about all the time about almost every T20 league, is that they don't play it proper home and away. And because if you're not playing, if the teams aren't playing home games, then they sort of just don't represent anything. And yeah, that's what I feel with this one, because if they're only playing at two stadiums that are in the same city, then like what's the point of everyone else existing? Why do you have teams that aren't from Mumbai if you're playing every game in Mumbai? And yeah, like I have this problem with most T20 leagues. Very few follow a full proper home away format. And I want to have, okay, I can't have connections with these teams because I'm just not from these places. But it would be nice if the people who these teams are supposed to represent are able to feel that connection by, seeing the team play home games in their city. And I would hope that would be one of the first things for future editions. One of the first changes to make to future editions is to give these teams home stadia to play at, and schedule the tournament around playing games at home, playing games away. It's like it's bad enough that they don't play proper home away games, but they still structure the league as a home away league, so it ends up being double round robin and taking twice as long. When like what's the difference? It's just the only difference between a team, the home leg of a fixture and the away leg of a fixture under this one, is who's calling the toss, who's calling the coin when it's in the air. And yeah, I just think that whole thing is, just playing at two grounds just sort of defeats the purpose of it. And like, there's no reason for them to be doing this anymore. Like, they want, the only reason to do this is to save on costs, which I just think they should like properly commit to this. And again, like it's the it's the Indian Premier League, right? The women's Indian Premier League, not the women's Mumbai Premier League. So why are you playing every game in Mumbai? There are plenty of women's cricket fans all over India. The teams are supposed to represent these other cities that they're named after, and they don't get to play in front of them. Like, what's the point? And yeah, I think that might also be something that affects attendance, because like, why would you go to random match A when you can go to random match B a couple days later? If they're all in Mumbai, right? So what does it matter? And yeah, like So that's one problem I have with T20 leagues that this chart that the Women's Premier League is also is doing. The other one is the names, but I'm fighting a losing battle on the names or whatever. They're all silly and generic. Not for me. Old man yells at cloud, whatever. They can do whatever they want. I guess my opinion doesn't matter on this. But yeah, like in general, it's good for the women's game. You'd hope that it expands in future editions, more teams, more expanse over India instead of just being confined to Mumbai. But again, like it's disappointing to see them going so small scale and so limited for the first proper edition.
Interesting because uh, from my perspective, it seems like, as you said, it might be an issue about the attendance. As every if every game is in the same city, then you can't put a lot of emphasis on a single game. But here's my thing. So obviously, whenever the Indian women's team plays in India, I feel like it plays on certain grounds that it probably shouldn't. I mean, there's a lot of games in Lucknow. There's some games in Vijayawada. I think it is in Karnataka, and there's also sometimes games in Cuttack, if I remember correctly. So from what I see, I feel like the league is trying to establish itself, one place at a time, because the women's cricket has not seen games in certain cities as of now. I mean, I have not seen Indian women play a lot in Delhi. I think they've played sometimes in Bangalore, that I remember. So I feel like they're kind of trying to establish it slowly and then expand it to the other cities. Obviously, there's Ahmedabad that is kind of an easy route, but I feel that is that. I mean, I think it is, as you said, an easy route, because as we saw in the Australia series, game in Mumbai means easier attendance because all of those games were sold out. So I feel that is that. I mean, there's not really a point of having a game in Delhi right now before seeing how the Delhi team is perceived. I guess because they have not played games in Delhi. I would, as before the tournament began, my whole point was simply don't play it in Mumbai. Play it at the venues that the Indian team usually plays. Play it at Cuttack. Play it at Vijayawada. Play it at places where I think there was one of those episodes of, I think, No Balls podcast where Kate Cross told how those games actually get a decent attendance. So maybe they'll be getting those attendances regardless of where the game is played. I mean, as you said, in Mumbai the attendance might not necessarily be high because there's not uh, enough emphasis on every game. But taking other route, as you said, uh, there's not a big thing about playing every game in the same city. But see, every team is going to have big players of its own, right? So don't you think the players can themselves be a big attraction, and that could lead to a good attendance?
I just don't see why playing every game in Mumbai, regardless of who the players are, I don't see why playing every game in Mumbai would allow for greater attendance than playing four games in Mumbai. There are the four home games in Mumbai, four home games in Lucknow, four home games in Ahmedabad, four home games in Delhi, four home games in Bangalore, because those are the five teams who have to play four home games each. So, if you space it out across the country, like a proper T20 league, you can allow for each ground to have more personality, each crowds to have more personality and actually get behind their team. Um, like I don't see why Delhi playing eight games in Mumbai would allow for the Delhi team to be perceived as being more Delhi as opposed to playing four games in Delhi. And again, and like the other problem is that like you have cricket fans all over India, many of whom would probably like to go watch these games. I feel like the reason Indian women's games do so well at non-traditional grounds is because those grounds don't get many India games. So these people who may not be able to travel out to Kolkata, Chennai, Ranchi, Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, Dharamsala. all the Hyderabad, all the major grounds they get most of the games. These people who can't go to those places, they get to watch an India game. That's why they want to watch. Like they'll. That's why they come out in droves when they finally get a chance to watch an India team play in their city. So I feel like it would be the same thing for the women's Premier League. If you play every game in Mumbai, the only people who can watch the tournament, come to the ground to watch the tournament, are the cricket fans in Mumbai. And you're going to saturate that market eventually, right? Whereas if you space it out, if you let every team play their home games in whatever their home city is, you can, the cricket fans in Delhi can watch, the cricket fans in Ahmedabad can watch, the cricket fans in Lucknow can watch, the cricket fans in Mumbai can watch, the cricket fans in Bangalore can watch. And, I just feel like if you limit it so much, because India is also a very big country, so it's not as easy to travel as, say, like in the UAE. It doesn't matter if the team plays in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. It doesn't make that big of a difference because they're very close to each other. Whereas in India, it's tough to go from Kolkata to Mumbai to watch this tournament. Yeah, like I just don't see why you wouldn't play it across the country. I don't see why attendance in Mumbai would necessarily be better. Playing all 31 games in Mumbai, I don't see why that would necessarily be better for attendance than playing in home than every team playing home games in their home stadium. And yeah, like if you are gonna do this, then fine, but then just make it a single round robin tournament. There's no point in it being double round robin then. If every game's at a neutral venue.
First of all, apologies on my side. I forgot to tell. Yeah, so Bangalore and Ahmedabad are actually also a really good option to host the games this year itself, because we have already seen the interest in the women. As I said, they have already played games in Bangalore, so I forgot to point that out. So as you said, you were right about that. But again, my point is actually almost the same again, because there's like three venues here, I mean three teams here that already have an established status quo around the attendance, where you almost know there would be packed stadiums if a game is played. Obviously Mumbai, there's Bangalore, there's Ahmedabad. Those are kind of, you are almost 100% certain crowds here. Lucknow is also 70-80% in my opinion, because it of games, with Indian women's team. But again, I feel like there's kind of a safe play on their side, which is fair. But obviously, as you said, it has to expand to that limit, where maybe next year we play at all those venues with home away games, and then it would probably be much better, because then those games would actually have some meaning. But coming back to now, because right now we do not even know who plays. So here's the point. The auction is coming up. It is on the 13th of February, and right now we know, well, I mean, we know that each would be made up of 18 members, five plus one associate, and the purses are roughly $1.5 million, a little less than that. It for 1.47 or $1.479 million, if I remember correctly. So there's been some noise here about who could be signed, who won't be signed, who the most expensive player. But that is not something to argue here. Point is, uh, I keep hearing this whole thing about how Australian cricketers are far ahead when compared to other teams. But as I said, and that is the argument that people bring up when saying ex Australia for the biggest prize, or would be the first priority compared to anyone else, because they are Australian. But here's my point. We have seen the 100, we've seen, and I do not think that the Australian players are necessarily the best T20 franchisee tournament players. And I'll get into my point later. But what is your opinion? I mean, you have seen the women's 100 and the WBBL, some of it, right? And Do you actually think the Australian players do replicate their national performances in these tournament? Because I don't think that happens a lot.
Yeah, like it's an interesting point because as a unit, Australia is undoubtedly the best team in the world in women's cricket, and they have been for a very long time. But yeah, a lot of that is down to they sort of cover each other's weaknesses, and they have like a set way to play, which it's much more easy to do in the international scene where you have a lot of experience with all these players, as opposed to on a franchise circuit where you're sort of meeting everyone for the first time, and just trying to gel on such short notice, and also playing different roles than what you do internationally. I do think that, like, even if the Australian players might not, have the franchise experience, or not the experience, but the franchise performances to back up the price tag that many people think they will go for. I still think they will go for a lot of money because we see this all the time in the men's IPL auction as well. International performances shoot the price way up. Uh, so I think the Australian players will still be the most expensive by and large. But yeah, at the tournament itself, it will be interesting to see how they get on because there is a pretty decent chance they, just like in the WBO, just like in the 100, they don't do as well as they're expected to. And I still think for many editions to come, Australian players will be the most expensive players at the auction. But over time, you might see that drop a little bit if they continue to not do very well at the tournament itself.
Interesting, because honestly, I am not on any extreme regarding that general opinion because there are Australian players that equally well in the international as well as the T20 franchisee. There's Beth Mooney, or there's obviously Elise Perry. She also has been doing really well in both the 100 and the women's Big Bash, as well as she usually does in internationals. But see, the T20 tournaments are, as you said, those are kind of a different beast. There's limited preparation, there's a lot of gelling that is needed. So, on the other hand, there's players in England, because this is my whole hypothesis regarding the kind of Australia gets into their international setup and their performance. I feel like England kind of has the same going for T20 franchisee tournaments. I feel like they have got players that that do well in those tournaments. Obviously, there's someone like Danny Wyatt who has gone around the world, played in whatever chances she has been provided. Obviously, there's some other South African allies that. Do you think that is kind of something that would come up later on, because now obviously we only had WBBL and 100 as of now, but now that there's also CPL that might expand there. There's a Pakistan's league as well. These all five leagues at least on our horizon. Do you think the whole England having those great T20 players? Obviously, I just talked about Danny White, but there's also players like Sivar Brunt and even others who are actually that great that they are an asset for the team. So do you think that would kind of come up in W? As you said, the Australian players' price tag might fall if they kind of have the kind of performances that they usually have in WBBL or the 100, and whereas players who actually do much better than they do in internationals. Obviously, the example being Danny White. So, do you think their price tag might rise later on?
Yeah, like as you get more T20 leagues, as the whole women's T20 system becomes more developed, more mature, then yeah, the way the auction dynamics will work will change, and yeah, we'll definitely see it over time. Like it's also changed a lot in the men's game over the last 15 years. This is the 15th year of the IPL, isn't it? Yeah, so we'll continue to see that you know as time goes on, and as the women's franchise circuit continues to develop. Yeah, it'll just be interesting to see like how it changes, especially how it changes compared to how the men's auction dynamics have changed.
Talking about the auction and the T20 World Cup, there's something that overlaps between those two, and that is the Cricket South Africa situation with their captain Van Niekerk. So she kind of failed a fitness test. And first of all, here's my simple question to you: can qualify as a fitness test to you? Trying to.
Like if it's the only fitness test, then no. But if it was one set of several, and it's like one failing grade that she has to improve upon, but the rest is fine, then yeah, like that would be fine. But if she just failed this one thing, this was the only test, and that's the reason she was excluded from the squad, and that's honestly kind of crazy.
So here's the thing. Actually, they are only having this one test, but they also provide an option to you. I mean, this is just news. I do not know actually if that is true. I hope that it is not true because it is. It sounds kind of crazy. So they only have this test, but the catch is that you can also try it out on treadmill.
And like everything I've read about this whole thing just reeks of the incompetence from CSA. And they're just massively shooting themselves in the foot here.
So see, here's the thing. We have already seen something happen with Liza Lee. I mean, she and Van Niekerk, they are both just 29 and 30-year old, and they're obviously one of the best that cricket South Africa has. But here's the thing. See, I won't mind someone having such rigid laws around selection of the players if they had some grassroots systems to prove that. I mean, it's not like they can just wave their finger and manifest 5 or 10 players of this quality that they are letting go through such with this lack of flexibility because uh, I mean, what do you think is the point? What do you think is going on in cricket South Africa's mind right now that would make them so assured about letting not one, not two, and possibly three of their best players just because of certain fitness standards that they cannot prove by a few seconds in this case.
I think it is important to have minimum fitness standards, but also you need to support the players, especially long-standing players, who are very important to your side. Van Niekerk is the captain, isn't she? And
Yep.
she, the reports were that she didn't get any support from CSA during her recovery, and that she was just told to do this run. And every fitness training she did since since her injury has been off of her own, on her own time, on her own money, because CSA didn't provide any help. Yeah, it just reeks of, both like just incompetence from CSA that it's gotten to this level. Um, maybe they are under resourced in their women's sector, and that shows that maybe they should reassign some funds to be able to hire more trainers and more physios and just more support staff around the women's game, because these are centrally contracted players who are very important to their women's team, and they're just treating them as they're treating them in such a poor way. I don't think it is malicious. I think it's just that they don't have the staff to be able to do anything better, so they have to end up just doing the bare minimum. And that's not good enough for a team that wants to challenge for titles, for a team that could be, one of the top 2, 3 teams in the game. But instead, they're just so hamstrung by, poor selection and actively alienating their best players.
Here's the here's the funny thing. I mean, you want to call it funny, you want to call it tragic. I don't know what it is, but here's it. So Van Niekerk actually she last year. I think that was the original injury part of it occurred. I think somewhere around January or February 2022. And after the injury, after her basically you want to call it recovery or whatever because CSA want to really put on it. So she has already played the 100 in 2022 and she won the tournament. I mean, she did not play every game because the Invincibles had some captaincy thing, but that's not the point here. So she played the tournament, a few games obviously, and won the tournament, and then basically went back to being injured, or however you want to put it. So I do not understand how can a player be injured and still play a tournament and still be later be injured to, you know, to your board. How does that happen? How stumble upon this situation? Because it is pretty much you know, I can't fathom this. Can you?
Yeah, I don't know. Like the whole thing is just it's just a huge mess that it's been terribly handled in every way. And yeah, I don't know what they're on about. Yeah, sure.
So that for today. So anything else? The finishing words that you want to say about the tournament or?
Yeah, the U-19 World Cup, great tournament, awful format. Fix it for next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.